everyone, welcome back to my booktube channel, Lisa in Bookland. Welcome back finally to my Jane Austen July and other July reading wrap up for 2023. Sorry, like July every year seems to just catch up with me. It was the exact same last year, a month I'm really excited for all the YouTube content of, and then I just disappear for a month, so what can you do? I did record 2 videos for Jane Austen July that I just never got to edit, so I'm still going to edit one of those, and I think I'll have that up on Thursday as usual, and this will come out on Monday, and then hopefully we'll be back to regular programming. And then the other one, I think I'm just going to re-record it next year because it might be more appropriate. So the one that it'll hopefully come out on Thursday is about my favourite Jane Austen fan fictions, which I was just so excited to make that video, and I was heartbroken that I didn't actually get to edit it. I was away for kind of 2 periods in July, and one of them I just forgot to bring my cable, and then the other one I had kind of unexpected company, so yeah, it was a disaster. But I did get a good bit of reading done. My intent at the start of the month as well is that I would vlog Jane Austen July, and so I have loads of clips that I never used, and because I did do a few interesting things in July, I think what I'll do is I'll just stick them together and put them at the end of the video. We went to go in Limerick to the All-Ireland hurling semi-final. I spent some time in a different town in Galway minding a different dog that I usually do. I went to Germany on a work trip, so I saw a bit of Frankfurt and Munich. So yes, I'll just stick them at the end if anybody is interested. But on to the books I read. So I think I did manage to fulfill all of the prompts, and I actually just read some other books as well, either books that I'd been reading in June that continued on to July. I also am participating in the Women's World Cup Readathon, but a lot of these books are to do with Jane Austen, and I'll link up the hosts of all of the Jane Austen related content below. Yes, I think I'll start off with the books that I didn't read for Jane Austen July and then go on to the Jane Austen July reads. I'm almost sure there's some missing from this list. What is new? The 2 that I'm going to talk about, the first one was for the Women's World Cup Readathon. I was drawn the team Costa Rica, and they got beaten by everybody they played. So I'm halfway through a book from Costa Rica that's called Monkeys Are Made of Chocolate, which I'm really enjoying. Hopefully that'll be included in my next wrap up. I read some more of Don Quixote because they got beat by Spain, so it was great to dig into that again. I'm at the start of the 2nd volume, and I know I said I'd finish that this year as one of my goals, so it was great to get some encouragement to keep going with that, and I actually forgot that it was quite enjoyable. It became too intimidating to pick up again, so great excuse. But a book that I did finish was this one for Japan, and that's actually my team going forward, so if anybody beats Japan, I'll then have to read a book from them, I think. So this one is The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea by Mishima. His first name was Yukio Mishima. I actually picked this up in Munich in a lovely bookshop. I'll put the name of it down below. It actually had an English language section, but also a separate Japanese literature section, which I wish now I'd spent more money on because I really enjoyed this. I've only read one Japanese book that I know of before, which I know is shocking to a lot of people, and it was kind of more of a young adult kind of fantasy type book. This is much darker, and I much more enjoyed this. Of course, Me Being Me, the title and the cover really drew my attention. I had heard of Mishima, and the cashier in the bookshop said that it was wonderful as well. So the main character whose perspective it's from is this 13-year-old boy who lives in a coastal town in Japan with his mother, and his mother actually meets this sailor, as the title would imply, who's on shore for a while, and she starts an affair with him. The boy and his friends, and how kind of they think about this sailor. It's about the mother. She's been lonely for a long time, so she, I suppose, finds solace in this man, and things go forward from there. There are some really dark themes to this book, as I mentioned. There's one quite distressing scene with a kitten. You could guess what young boys might have done to the kitten. Yeah, it does get progressively darker, but I just thought it was really beautifully written. I really love the characters. I loved the setup of the coastal town and the way that was done. So yeah, I'll definitely be reading more Mishima. And the other book I'm going to talk about that had nothing to do with Jane Austen July is very random, and that is The Making of a Marchioness by Frances Hodgeson Burnett. Kind of a story to this. I randomly got recommended this film on YouTube, like obviously an illegal copy, but it was kind of a made for TV film. Fortunately, part of the time I was in Germany, thankfully when we were finished with the work bit, I was staying on at the weekend and I got such a bad cold, so I did have to spend a good few hours catching up and sleep and resting, and I watched it anyways, and it was called The Making of a Lady, and I just really enjoyed it, and I just knew it was based on a book, so I looked up the book on audiobook and I found a copy and I listened to it on the plane on the way home, and yeah, I really loved it with some caveats. It was really interesting to read a novel that Frances Hodgeson Burnett had written for adults, because I'd only read The Secret Garden and The Little Princess before, which are both children's books. It's about, and I was just intrigued by the premise, which caught my eye for the movie and then seeking out the book. It's about this young woman in like the early 1900s, late 1800s, I'm not exactly sure which. She is kind of working as a paid companion, like sustaining herself really. I suppose she's a bit of an impoverished gentlewoman, and she's just trying to make her way in the world, and she eventually ends up marrying this much older man who is a marquis. So that's where the title comes, The Making of a Marchioness. So yeah, it was kind of a very nice love story, I suppose, and both the book and the film, so originally it was actually two books. So the first book was The Making of a Marchioness, up to the point they got married, and then the second book was called The Methods of Lady Walderhurst, and that was kind of more of a gothic story where people are trying to take advantage of Lady Walderhurst, the Marchioness, while her husband has gone back to India. So I do think I enjoyed the first part of the book and probably the film a lot more. I really love that she is such, I suppose, a sweet soul, as everybody calls her, so helpful. She does everything for everyone, that's especially apparent in the book, how treasured she is by all of her connections, and yeah, just I suppose it's nice when somebody that is a good person ends up falling on their feet and meeting a nice older man. So then the second half, I suppose it just doesn't read as well to modern readers. Spoilers here if anybody is interested in reading this book. Like Lady Walderhurst is very concerned with getting an heir for Lord Walderhurst, and there's an awful lot about, for all that she's very spirited and helpful, she's not very, I suppose, proactive about trying to do things for herself. When she's under threat, she kind of does in the end kind of just end up hiding and waiting for like somebody to come and sort it out for her, which can be frustrating, I suppose, as a modern woman, but you know, that's realistic for the way things probably would happen. And also a big caveat, it's in the film as well as in the book, the two kind of baddies are two Indian women, so there are like bits of racism in it, somehow nearly more apparent in the film. Like I think one of the characters in the book is like at least partially redeemed, whereas not so much in the film. So yeah, just to keep that in mind, that it is like obviously a classic of its time, but I really did enjoy it. I think I think it's published by Persephone, so I would like to pick up a copy because I think it might be a little bit of a comfort read, at least like the first half of it. So yeah, just a really nice read. Oh, I forgot about there's a bit of a like spurious medical recovery at the end, which I thought was quite funny. Yeah, I know Frances Hodgeson Burnett had written a lot more, so I'd definitely be excited to see what else I can find by her. I do think the film was quite different, like enjoyable, but yeah, different in a good few ways than the book, and yeah, I think I'd just enjoy them separately really, as it was a loose enough adaptation. Then on to the Jane Austen July books. So the first challenge was to read a book by the woman herself, Jane Austen, one of her main 6 novels, and I actually saved this to last. I read this book while I was in Germany and I so enjoyed it. Emma by Jane Austen. I hadn't read it for a while, and yeah, it's just an absolute delight, of course. I just love, as usual, like Jane Austen's dialogue. I noticed it in Pride and Prejudice when I read it last year, and I noticed, I suppose, again this year, like it's just so witty and entertaining. I absolutely love all the background characters. I think, yeah, like they come to life with me in Emma and Persuasion more than any other book, and I suppose they are her later books. I just love Emma's sister and her husband. He's just so funny, Mr. John Knightley. Like in the video I'm going to release on Thursday about the fan fictions of Jane Austen, I was wondering, I couldn't think of of anything in Emma that I would like to expand it on, but I actually would love a separate book about Mr. John Knightley, even just his legal practice. I really want to know. He's so cute how he's so attached to his kids. Like he's forced to go out one evening and he's angry because he's deprived of a whole evening with his kids are my absolute favourite. Like Mr. Weston, he's come down from London after doing a day's business in London, and he gets dressed up and comes out to meet the people that have gathered after dinner in a different house. I can't remember the details, I'm sorry. And Mr. John Knightley is just absolutely speechless. He can't get over that Mr. Weston could have just went to bed and nobody would notice, or just sit in his library with a drink and nobody would have known that he was home from London, but he made all the effort. He's just speechless. I just love it. So yeah, funnily enough, he's probably the character that like stood out to me. I just love Mr. John Knightley. I feel like every time I read this book I like change my mind about Emma and Mr. Knightley. I don't think they'll ever be one of my favourite couples. I think maybe I liked them as a couple more on previous readings, and it's been a while since I've seen an adaptation, so that probably influences it as well. Maybe I just don't find they've so much chemistry in the book. Like I suppose I know he kind of does tell her off a good bit and things. I don't know, maybe we probably just need to see a bit more of what's going on in Mr. Knightley's head, but it's not a criticism. I like all of Jane Austen's books, there's so much more going on than the main love story, and with this book there's an awful lot extra going on. Like I just love, I absolutely adore Jane Fairfax. I really enjoy her character, and yeah, I think there's just so much interesting stuff happening off screen in Emma, and with Harriet and Mr. Martin. Of course, I do have a bit of a soft spot for Mr. Martin. One of the funny Jane Austen things this month is I was watching the Barbie movie, and a character was at the table. I'm like, where do I recognise him from? And I was digging in my head trying to, well, by the way, it wasn't that like Pride and Prejudice illusion in the Barbie movie. Excellent. My friends looked over at me and we had such a laugh about it. But anyways, yes, it was Mr. Martin from the like 2020 adaptation of Emma. It was great. It was so nice. I hadn't seen him in anything else since, and it was similar type of character. I just thought it was really fun. A really enjoyable book. So yeah, although I only managed to read the one, I'm really glad it was Emma. And now that I have read all of Jane Austen's books relatively recently, I'm still not going to commit to doing a ranking video because it's so hard. So the next prompt then is to read something by Jane Austen that's not one of her main 6 novels. So I took part in the readathon of the Juvenilia for this, or at least part of it. So I didn't take part for the whole Juvenilia, but I did read volume the first, which has some delightful stories in it. I listened to Katie from Books and Things' readings of 2 of the stories, the beautiful Cassandra and the Henry and Eliza, and they really added to my enjoyment as well. Henry and Eliza is so fun and wild, and the drunkenness in it is so hilarious, but also I really enjoyed the beautiful Cassandra. It had stuck in my head. I love the first part. The character Cassandra steals a hat and runs out of her shop and goes around town with no money. It's so funny. I feel like I've heard a lot of people say this about Jane Austen's Juvenilia, but I did feel like one volume of it was enough for me to read in the 1 month. So yes, I'll read volume the 2nd and volume the 3rd next time, hopefully, which have some of the longer works in it. So yeah, that'll be to look forward to. So the third prompt, I'm going off these by memory, so hope I'm not getting them mixed up. The third prompt is read a book that was written by a contemporary of Jane Austen. So I read 3 things for this. So the main thing I read probably was this, The Wild Irish Girl by Sydney Owenson, Lady Morgan, who is one person. I was a bit confused over that for a while. She was called Lady Morgan. And yes, I loved some aspects of this. So it's set in Ireland, and it's known as a very nationalistic book, which is what drew my attention to it. And it's about this guy called Horatio who belongs to the Irish gentry class, but he lives in London, like a lot of them would have done at the time, the absentee landlords, and his father actually sends him back to his estate night. I think it's in like North Mayo from the descriptions, as a punishment, and he actually gets to know the man who would have been like the original Gaelic lord of the area, who calls himself the Prince, and Glorvina his daughter. So I love some parts of this. Like, I absolutely loved the first like 30 or 40 pages of the book, where Horatio was making his way across Ireland up to the point that he did get to the Gaelic lord's castle and got to know Glorvina, and then it kind of fell down the thing of it being like more preachy, and a lot of stuff in there about Irish myths and legends and stories and superstitions, like very interesting, and I suppose little bits, but there was just lots of footnotes. Really just felt like information being regurgitated at you, and then Horatio like just, I don't know, idolising Glorvina and thinking how wonderful she was. And yeah, there's a huge section in the middle of the book that is all that, and then it picks up again for like the last 30 or 40 pages. So if only it had been like more plot based and less like preachy in the middle, I think it should have been really good, because there's a really good ending to it. But yeah, still an interesting book, and I must like seek out more Anglo-Irish literature. So yeah, it was just interesting to read for something different. So I also read a play. I had intended to read more plays on my TBR. I also had The Genius of Jane Austen, which is all about dramatic references in Jane Austen, so it's a pity I didn't get to that. I did read The Rivals by Richard Brimsley Sheridan on audiobook, a full cast production, which is really entertaining. I really enjoyed it. It was one of the plays that had been mentioned, a book I'd read before, and I was just curious to see how it was, and yeah, it was just brilliant. And I was like, where does this look familiar? And it was, I don't know if anybody who's maybe London based has seen that National Theatre production of John, I can't think of the name of it now, John something Flies Again. It was like a Second World War retelling of this play, and I'd been getting ads for it for ages, and I was going to see it in the cinema, and then the day it was on in the cinema, unfortunately I was unavailable, so I missed it. But I'm so sorry I missed that now, because yeah, I just thought it'd be really interesting. It's quite convoluted, but basically there's this character, is it Lydia? She has it in her head that she doesn't want to marry for money, she wants to marry, you know, somebody poor, but she actually ends up falling in love with this guy who actually has money, but he hasn't told her that. He knows the ambition of her, so he's trying to hide the fact that he's wealthy from her, and yeah, the way their families end up entangled, and his friends and things, is just really funny. Brilliant production on Audible as well, so yeah, would highly recommend. And then the last thing I read for this is actually a reread. So I said I was going to read some Coleridge, and I did. And I did read even some standalone poems, but I actually did ending up back reverting to The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which I also read last year, and I just really enjoy it. It's just a great story to it. A lot of kind of like recognisable phrases, I suppose. I just love the way it rhymes, like the fair breeze blew, the white foam flew, the furrow followed free, we were the first to ever burst into that silent sea. And that line, as idle as a painted ship upon a painted ocean, I love that. So yeah, I just even the setup of it is so funny. There's this man that's going into a wedding, with the wedding party, like it's into the reception, or the 1800s equivalent, and this old man, this ancient mariner, pulls him across. He's like, come on, I have a story to tell you, and the man is like, but the wedding, I have to go to the wedding, and he ends up just being trapped by this man. I think we all know that feeling. You're stuck talking to somebody you really would not like to be. So the whole setup is funny, but the narrative that he tells them then is just, yeah, really brilliant. Yeah, someday I will read more of Coleridge. I know there's another long poem in here, Christabel, and loads of others, I'm sure. So yeah, who knows, maybe I'll make it further next time. So is the next prompt to read some non-fiction about Jane Austen or her time. So I have this book, Jane Austen by Norman Sherry. I don't really have much to say about this. It's literary criticism, but I have to say I didn't really get a lot out of it. I'm probably just not a literary criticism kind of person. Like, there's some mildly interesting things, but nothing that I thought was groundbreaking or anything. And I suppose this is a book from like the 1960s, so yeah, probably old enough ideas. I don't know. English, I didn't really like studying English at school, so I suppose I shouldn't be surprised that it still isn't the case now. So then the next prompt was to read like a retelling of Jane Austen, or books set in the time. I'm saying these imperfectly, I know, so I read a good few for this. So the first one I actually read was an audiobook. I wanted something easy to listen to, and it was so fun. And that was Jane Austen Cannot Marry by May McGoldrick. In typical haphazard fashion, I have to record this clip the next day because I deleted the vlog clip I wanted to use as the review for this book. But anyways, it follows this lady who her job is called a scribe guardian, so she has to go back in time to ensure that things stay the way they are and that classic literature stays the way it is. So she has to go back in time because it looks like there is a danger that Jane Austen might marry someone, and as a result her books wouldn't be written. So she has to go back and prevent that. But there's also, and this is maybe the one thing that it wasn't what I expected, there's a huge component of the storyline that's actually set in the present day as well, and it's about her relationship with this guy who she's kind of met in her like complicated time stream, a bit like Time Traveler's Wife style, and yeah, their relationship. So what I didn't realise until a bit into this is it's actually kind of a persuasion retelling, which is really fun. I will say that Jane Austen herself, it sounds from the premise that it'll be mostly set in the past, but Jane Austen herself doesn't actually come in it until the end of the book. That part of the book is actually quite short. It was really fun, I suppose, for people that have read Jane Austen biographies as well. It's kind of about that love interest she had in one of the seaside towns. I can't remember which one. That's always like kind of tantalizingly hinted at. We don't know anything about it at all, so it was fun that the author chose to focus on that little area of Jane's life. The Jane Austen stuff was obviously a treat for Jane Austen July, and the characters are convincing, but at the end I think it could have been either open-ended or else it's supposed to be a series, and I actually think it'd be a massive waste if it wasn't a series, because I did find like the time travel aspect and the kind of more science fiction part was set up so well, and like really good world building about how it all worked, and the fact that she's not just a random time traveler, like that is her job. She's a scribe guardian. I just think there's so much potential for her to go back about other authors in the past, and like she tells some stories that she's like about, she met George Eliot, I think it was mentioned, so I think there's definitely a lot of potential to keep going as a series. And yeah, I just thought this book was really well written, just yeah, a lot more in the modern period than I would have expected. It was set in, I can't remember where in America, but like quite a remote place and lots of snow and things, and that setting was really cool as well. So yeah, would really recommend, and a great addition, I think, to the Jane Austen retellings, like in terms of the actual character herself that are out there. So yeah, I can't wait to hear from anybody else who reads it. I think it's quite a recent release from 2023. Another book that I read pretty early on in the month, and this is The Other Mr. Darcy by Monica Fairview. I'd had this on my shelves for a really long time, so I'm so glad to have finally ticked it off. It focuses on Caroline Bingley. It focuses on someday I will have my own house where I have room for shelves to put the books in a way that they won't fall down like that. Oh, hopefully all the brain cells are not knocked out of my head. It focuses on the other Mr. Darcy, who is actually Robert Darcy, Mr. Darcy's cousin that's been living in America. And at the start of the book, Caroline Bingley is crying, heartbroken at the main wedding at the end of Pride and Prejudice. I don't think it's possible to spoil Pride and Prejudice, but just in case. So yeah, Caroline, Robert Darcy actually ends up seeing Caroline crying, and she's absolutely mortified, and yeah, it goes on from there, I suppose. it's such a pity because I really felt like this book was really well written, the storyline was good, like the dialogue felt, you know, true enough. But I just felt like Caroline Bingley was way too softened on this, and I was especially reminded when I saw like, I recently have been watching, I'll talk about it in a second, the 1995 Pride and Prejudice, and I was like, wow, like how different Caroline Bingley is in the adaptation, and the Pride and Prejudice book is just, it was less recently in my mind. But yeah, so it would have been really interesting if she'd started off the book like true to the character in Pride and Prejudice and became a better person as it went on. But in this book she's like best friends with Jane, so glad to have Jane in the family, like, you know, and it's really all of the bad aspects of her character are actually transferred to Mrs. Hurst, who we don't really know a huge amount about from Pride and Prejudice, but yeah, so that was my big caveat with this book. But I did enjoy it and I thought it was really good apart from that. There was a bit of a weird thing with Elizabeth Bennet. The one thing that kind of happened, it was like implied about her at the start of the book, that it seemed to kind of disappear, I don't know, but I did, Robert Darcy was an interesting character, and yeah, I suppose his American perspective on things, so yeah, I'm not really sure if I'd recommend it. Maybe if you're sympathetic to Caroline Bingley anyways, you could give it a go, but yeah, definitely just with the view, it is very pro Caroline Bingley. And then the other one I'm going to talk about is Godmersham Park by Gill Hornby. I was delighted to get to this one because I'd be looking forward to it. I read Miss Austen last year by the same author, and this follows Anne Sharp, who's the governess to Jane Austen's niece. I would say this hasn't actually hugely sunk in my head, but I did enjoy it. It was just about her connection with the Austen family, especially with Henry Austen, and yeah, once Jane appeared, of course, it did improve the book, but yeah, I did enjoy it and I would recommend it. It just, for some reason, just hadn't really sunk much in my head. So I can see my camcorder is running out of battery. Last two prompts are watching prompts. So the first prompt was to watch a direct screen adaptation, and as I've already said, I'm actually not finished watching it yet. I have half of the last episode left, but yes, I did watch a good bit of this Pride and Prejudice from 1995, and it's been a while since I watched this. I will say I love them both, but my go-to Pride and Prejudice is the Keira Knightley one because it's shorter, and I really like Keira Knightley as an actress, but I forgot how good this one was. Oh, like, what can I say about it? I just like Jennifer Ale, is that how you pronounce it? She's really stuck out to me as an actress this time, especially my favourite scene. I think it's probably my favourite scene in Pride and Prejudice, no matter what format it is when she goes to visit a house and is not expected there. I love that so much. You just feel for her. It's so mortifying. I was trying to explain it to my mum this morning how it worked, and she found it funny, but I just love the way it's acted by her in this. It's what we all feel like internally. I can't believe you made me come here, it's so embarrassing, it's the worst thing in the world. It's just, I just love that scene so much. So yeah, brilliant. I was still really enjoying the 1995 one, but I think I did grow a lot in my love for this one as well on this watching. And then the last prompt was to watch a more modern screen adaptation. So I actually watched a YouTube miniseries. I watched when I rewatched the first series, I watched for the first time the second series of what's it called? My head is gone today. Of Rational Creatures, and yeah, it was absolutely excellent. The first series I liked but didn't love, and the second series absolutely amazing, especially the end. I just thought it's so hard to do the end of Persuasion well, and I was just, how you'd translate it to a modern retelling was, I just didn't know how they'd manage it, and we saw how it was done wrong. We saw how they interpreted a famous letter in the 2022 adaptation last year, and it was a disaster. This time they changed the wording, but it was still done so well. I just thought it was a really, really good adaptation. I'd highly recommend if you've not seen it yet. So yes, that is it for my Jane Austen July wrap up. Look for that video on Thursday, which will be the only Jane Austen related video, unfortunately, I will be putting out for Jane Austen July after the fact. And yes, thanks for your patience. Hopefully we're back to more regular scheduling from now on. And yes, thanks to the hosts for hosting Jane Austen July as usual. And yes, if I haven't seen any videos, I'm sure I'll be doing a troll back in the past for Jane Austen July videos that I missed. Hang on at the end if you do want to see that little bit of vlog footage I have. And yes, thanks for listening, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on Thursday for my next video.